with a kind of bombshell mea culpa from the CDC. Why the agency's own director today is admitting the U.S. made a big mistake in how it handled COVID. She says the CDC has to do better. So what does that actually look like? Plus, Rudy Giuliani spending 6 hours in front of a Georgia grand jury in an investigation about the lies on the 2020 election. But the county's top prosecutor wants to know from the former President Trump's ex-lawyer and whether he actually said anything worth knowing. Plus, demonstrators at the White House today want action. They're accusing Japan of holding an unfair trial for Navy Lieutenant Ridge Alconis after he killed 2 people in a car crash. Coming up just ahead, my conversation with the wife of Lieutenant Alconis on what she wants the Biden administration to do now. Plus, a year after the last American left Afghanistan, the general who led that withdrawal is reflecting on how the war could have gone differently. Our exclusive with General Frank McKenzie and Courtney Cubie in tonight's original. And on Wednesdays, we wear pink, or at least we talk about it. And while that's a Mean Girls reference, it's all about Barbie-core today, why this latest viral fashion trend mimics the world's most famous doll, for better or for worse, later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're starting tonight with that big shakeup at the CDC, with the agency's own director describing the response to the COVID pandemic as a failure and calling for big changes, saying the agency has to do better. And think about this. This is an extraordinary moment. Right? Dr. Rochelle Walensky acknowledging what a bunch of people have been saying since the pandemic started. The CDC, as you know, has been criticized from almost the jump for its confusing messaging and guidance on testing and vaccines and masks as it relates to the coronavirus. And now, after more than 1 million Americans have died from the virus, she says the agency has to work to get the public's trust back. So what are they going to do? Here's an outline of the plan as it stands right now. The agency plans to beef up the team that responds to public health emergencies, meaning there can't be a shortage of staffers who respond to things like a COVID outbreak. They'll cut down on how long it takes to review urgent studies, the point being to analyze data and share it with people, the public, faster. And Dr. Walensky wants to fix the CDC's communications push to make sure agency staffers use plain language that is easy for all of us to understand about this medical, public health, complicated stuff. All of it comes a few months after Dr. Walensky ordered a review saying she wanted to modernize the CDC. Since then, both the White House and the agency have taken even more heat for not reacting fast enough on the monkeypox outbreak. And then there are those questions about reports of polio and wastewater, too. It's a lot, so let's bring in Carol Lee to talk about it. Carol, this is a big agency, right? More than 12,000 people work here. What Dr. Walensky is talking about is like a big cultural shift. We know that is probably going to take some time.
Absolutely, Hallie. And what you're hearing from the CDC director is that they want to shift. It's almost as if they just want to be more modern, more relevant, more interacting and able to interface with the public. And so what she, in her words, she says that they want to be an action-oriented culture within the CDC. And that means a number of things. It means being less academic, less insular, and really trying to communicate with the public in ways that the public understands. It's been around for 75 years, the CDC. It's an agency that's detached. It's in Atlanta. It's something that people don't really understand what they do. A lot of people work there. There's a lot of research that goes on. But what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic is that they were the ones everybody was turning to for guidance on how to live our lives, on how to get back to our lives. And in the words of Rochelle Walensky, they failed at that. There was that confusing guidance on any number of things. There was very tortured language that was very hard to understand at different times when people were just looking for answers to simple questions like, can I hug my grandmother, or can my kids go back to school? And they weren't really able to step up, in the words of Rochelle Walensky, at that moment. And so she's saying that they failed, and they're going to try to fix that. They're going to move more quickly, get data out more quickly, make data something that is not for people who are in academia, but for you, me, our friends, our family, people we know, that they can understand what is happening. Because the one thing that we know, if you talk to public health officials, is that COVID-19, while yes, changed everyone's lives, changed the world, we're still living with it today, there's always going to be, and there's expected to be, something down the road. And that's where the CDC, in their view, has an opportunity to really answer the call at that time, but it's going to take a lot of time. As you said, it's a very large agency. It's been around for a long time. And you can imagine those 12,000 people that work there, there is an embedded culture. So one of the things that we're expecting is there could be some leadership changes at the CDC and things like that. But this is just the beginning, and this comes after a few months of a review. That was an external review, which is worth noting.
You know, change does not come free. This kind of change does not come free. The agency says it needs more money, and it needs more say on what to do with that money. That's an important factor here, too.
Yeah, it is. And look, this is good luck with that if there's a Republican Congress, right? Because the CDC has been under fire for a long time. And there's a lot of questions about what they're doing with the budget that they have, whether they can trim and move money around and make better, more efficient, function more efficiently and reach some of the goals that the director is outlining without adding funds, because that's something that's going to be a tough sell in the next Congress.
What has the reaction been, Carol? You're traveling with President Biden there in Delaware. What has the reaction been from the folks that you're talking to? Because, when you think about the sort of moment that we're in here, if you want to be sweepy about it, right? This is a pandemic that, as we laid out at the top, has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. The CDC has come under serious fire for having mishandled at least portions of the response here. And now there is this extraordinary acknowledgement that, hey, we didn't do as good a job as we should have in this life or death moment. I mean, I think it's a significant thing.
It's a very significant thing, and it's something that not just the Biden administration has been frustrated with, the way the CDC functions, but the Trump administration, previous administrations. Obviously, it's been very acute during the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think what people are feeling is hopeful that it can get there. It's just that it's going to take a lot of time.
Carol Lee, live for us there in Wilmington. Carol, good to see you. Thank you for that reporting. Appreciate it. To our other top story tonight now, the latest investigation into former President Trump and his lies about the 2020 election. With the focus today, the center of that investigatory political universe down in Georgia. The former president's ex-personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, just in the last couple hours, left his conversation. I'm putting conversation in quotes for a reason. We'll get to that. Left his conversation with a grand jury after spending 6 hours with them. Our cameras only caught his cars leaving. Giuliani had already gotten inside and left before reporters could catch up to him. So here he is arriving this morning. By the way, taking the public route inside the building to that closed door meeting. And we do know this. Giuliani is not there because he wants to be, because he's volunteering to be. He has to be there. He got a subpoena back in July and just learned last week he is a target in this investigation by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. She accuses him of lying to the state's legislature about widespread voter fraud. Blaine Alexander is live for us in Atlanta. Blaine, you have been posted up at the courthouse for all 6 of those hours that Rudy Giuliani was inside. And the thing of it is, we don't know much about what he did or did not say, although several legal experts have told me that it is likely that he, in some instances at least, pled the fifth. Probably.
Absolutely. Probably, right? That's what a lot of legal experts that I spoke to that you've kind of had on your shows have said, that it would be something that they would advise their own clients to do. So, Hallie, right now we know the bookends. We know how he got in. We know how he got out. We don't know what happened during that 6-hour time span. And even his own attorney here, Bill Thomas, his local counsel here in Georgia, would not comment on the testimony when asked by just a couple of reporters as he was walking out of the courthouse itself. In fact, he only spoke for about 10 seconds, and essentially made the point that you made earlier. They're here because they were compelled to be here. They were here because they were subpoenaed. They fulfilled their duty, and now they're going to let the grand jury process play out, and they're not going to speak on it. So what he said or didn't say inside largely remains a mystery. We know that his attorney already said that he's not going to talk to any conversations that he had with the former president. But as it comes to really that central issue that puts Giuliani in the middle of all of this, the statements that he made to Georgia lawmakers back in 2020, we don't know how he addressed that inside.
Giuliani is not the only one that the district attorney wants to talk with. She's also trying to get in the former legal advisor for Mr. Trump, Jenna Ellis. Talk about this piece of it, because people might remember that Giuliani and Ellis had a couple of moments together, rather infamously, in which they appeared talking about, these lies about election fraud in 2020, lies that weren't true.
And so Jenna Ellis being being ordered by a judge to testify is very much linked to Rudy Giuliani. So we're talking about the same instances. All of this dates back to December of 2020. It's something that a lot of people may or may not have seen, but basically Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis came down and appeared before a group of Georgia state lawmakers. And that's when Giuliani, like you said, really peddled a lot of conspiracy theories, debunked myths really about Georgia's election. What the DA is interested in, and Fani Willis, is the role that Jenna Ellis played in setting up or arranging those panels, Hallie.
You've talked with her. You've interviewed her. What is coming next for this grand jury over the next few weeks? She has many months to go if she wants to keep this grand jury impaneled. But what do you anticipate is potentially the next kind of turn in this?
I think two things, Hallie. One, she's going to take her time. She's going to take all the time that she needs. She can go until May of next year, and she says she's going to do a robust investigation. And two, there are likely more subpoenas coming. When I asked her if we could see possible former White House officials, Trump family members, she said none of those options are off the table, Hallie.
Blaine Alexander, live for us there in Atlanta. Thank you, Blaine. Good to see you. We're learning more tonight about the next steps for the Republican Party's most outspoken critic of the aforementioned Donald Trump, as he gets political payback with Liz Cheney losing in a blowout to her primary opponent in Wyoming. But Congresswoman Cheney is making it clear today to NBC News that her political career, in her view, is far from over. Watch.
Are you thinking about running for president? That's a decision that I'm going to make in the coming months, Savannah. I'm not going to make any announcements here this morning, but it is something that I'm thinking about, and I'll make a decision in the coming months.
For now, Cheney says her new mission is to do whatever it takes to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office. She's formed a new political action committee already today, right, hours after the polls closed, called The Great Task, that will put money towards helping some of these anti-Trump candidates, presumably. The Great Task, by the way, that's a reference to the last line of the Gettysburg Address, delivered by a president who also lost congressional races. Ahem. Joining me now, Vaughn Hilliard, and Ali Vitale is going to be with us in a second to break down all the results from overnight. But I want to start with Vaughn in Wyoming. And Vaughn, you know, a lot of times when there's a loss for a politician, it's like, okay, chapter is closed, new thing here. Liz Cheney is absolutely starting a new chapter, right? She has been very clear that she wants to take on the continued rise to power of Donald Trump inside her party. There's a speculation about 2024. There's potential, talk about could she start a think tank, join up with another group, et cetera. Talk about what her lane is, right? If she does move, even politically, to try to take on Donald Trump in a substantive way.
I think that's the really difficult part here. If she couldn't find a lane in the state of Wyoming, where her family has been known for almost 5 decades, it's tough to come up with where nationally she could find her place. Because it's not just Wyoming Republicans that are roundly rejecting individuals in their party who have been deemed by Donald Trump to be opposition forces from within. We have seen the likes of congressmen from South Carolina, from Michigan, Washington State lose their primaries to Trump-backed challengers here. But you've also seen the likes of, Trump-endorsed candidates winning for governor in Maryland, in Illinois, in Arizona. That's why if you're looking at Liz Cheney as where could you build up a coalition, it's kind of tough to find because, yes, she found sympathetic independents and Democrats, but ultimately, if you're mounting a run for the presidency, you got to find some loyal, faithful followers who are more than supportive of your efforts on the January 6th committee. They've got to stand by you and your policies here. And Hallie, the other part is you didn't see any Republicans running here to the state of Wyoming over the last year to campaign on behalf of Liz Cheney. You had John Boehner and Paul Ryan hold fundraisers for her, as well as Mitt Romney, but it's not like you saw her out on the campaign trail with the likes of Republican members of Congress who she's been serving for with years up on Capitol Hill.
That's a good point. One of the things that she talked about, and that we are going to be talking a lot about here on this show, and I know you will too, is the idea that a number of people who have succeeded in these Republican primaries so far writ large over the last several months are election deniers, right? People in positions who are seeking positions of power who deny the results, the legitimate results of the 2020 election. She's concerned about that, and she thinks it's going to take a while to figure that out.
And in her interview with Savannah earlier, Savannah asked her the question about this idea of time for choosing. Because a couple months ago, Liz Cheney suggested that Republican voters would ultimately see that Donald Trump should not be the leader of this Republican Party and that the election was fair and accurate. And there were 8 public hearings held by the January 6th committee that were televised nationally. Yet, again, she couldn't convince their own folks in her own backyard. And I think that is the challenge here. You know, this is a new Republican Party, but also the voters are looking different. I mean, the Bushes are now out of office. George P. Bush losing his race in Texas to a Trump-backed challenger. And now Liz Cheney. It's more than symbolism. You know, it's at its roots. The Republican voters are looking for something different.
You look at the number, 64% of Republicans who have won their primaries so far this year do not believe 2020 was legit. You guys, we talk about 2024. There's another potential candidate widely speculated about planning a run, former Vice President Mike Pence. He was up in the key state of New Hampshire already. But what was interesting here is not just that he went to politics and eggs, which I know you know well, but that he cracked the door open to potentially testifying in front of the January 6th committee if he were asked to. Here's what he said.
It would be unprecedented in history for a vice president to be summoned to testify on Capitol Hill. But as I said, I don't want to prejudge. If there's ever any formal invitation rendered to us, we'd give it due consideration.
We don't know that the committee would formally invite him or wants to formally invite him. Benny Thompson, the chair, has simply said they're discussing it, but Pence is not closing the door here.
He's not closing the doors, and this is somebody who is in New Hampshire for a reason. He's also mulling a 2024 bid. But again, the reality is here, I think Mike Pence is wrestling with do you go and speak and do you meet your moment like Liz Cheney is deciding to do? Or do you try to wade carefully into some of these other political races? His picks for governor in Arizona and Wisconsin just this month alone, they both lost to the Trump-endorsed candidates here. So this is tough political waters for any of these leaders who are looking to have a presence in the Republican Party when Donald Trump's weight is still so strong, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us along one of the best stretches of roadway in this great country. Vaughn, thank you so much. Enjoy your trip home. In Alaska, they're still counting the votes, right? Another primary there. We don't have all the results, but Ali Vitale is there for us from Anchorage.
A lot of decisions for Alaska voters last night and no real results, at least not yet. There were 3 races, though, that caught our attention. We can tick through them just one by one. The first is the one with the most imminent consequences. 3 people here vying to finish the term vacated by the late Congressman Don Young, who passed away in March. That's people like Sarah Palin, Nick Begich, and Mary Peltola, all competing for that seat. No results there yet, and that's not exactly surprising, in part because of the system that was being used here, voters using the ranked choice voting system for the first time, but also because most people in Alaska, just given how big the state is, they vote by mail. It takes some time for those ballots to come in, so we're not expecting results in that race for at least a week, maybe 2. But then what voters were also doing in relation to the House is figuring out what the primary field is going to look like for November. Again, the ranked choice voting system means you are taking very large pools of primary candidates and you have to first whittle them down. So that's what voters also did last night, getting a top 4 field for voters to then choose between again in November. It's a lot of the same names that we already see up for the House seat in the short term, but that's a race that's going to come back around again in November for a full 2-year term. And then, of course, the race that was the true test of what Trump means in Alaska is the Senate primary here. Senator Lisa Murkowski, the only senator who voted to convict Trump of impeachment charges, who's up again in these midterm elections. Both Palin and Murkowski were testing the theory of what Trump's endorsement could mean. Palin hoping it means a whole lot. Murkowski hoping it doesn't mean anything at all, and effectively telling me as much yesterday when she was trying to talk about the role of herself in this Republican Party that has really been remade in Trump's image. As far as Murkowski, though, it was Judgment Day, but not the day that tells us a lot. We expected her to make it to the top 4 in her large primary field, and those 4 candidates are then going to be on the ballot for this Senate contest come November.
Ali Vitale reporting for us there from Alaska. Right now, the family of a Navy lieutenant is hoping to bring pressure on President Biden and the White House to get Lieutenant Ridge Alconis back to the U.S. from Japan. That is where he is serving a 3-year sentence for a deadly car crash. Just a few hours ago, his wife told me she thinks the U.S. can still get him back. What do you want to see?
I want to see him come home. I am not an expert in policy. I have never worked in the U.S. government. I have never worked in the Department of Defense. But I'm an American. I believe in America. I believe in our administration. And I believe that they are the experts that can figure out a way to bring Ridge home without him being a criminal in this country.
Brittany Alconis was also at this demonstration earlier in front of the White House. Trevor Reed was there, too. He's another U.S. citizen. He had a different circumstance, of course, jailed abroad in Russia nearly 3 years. Today saying Japan did not give Alconis a fair trial. So if you don't know Alconis' story, here's what it is. Japanese courts found him guilty of negligent driving. His car hit people outside a restaurant last year. 2 people died. Alconis and his family were coming back from a hike, and he testified that mountain sickness basically made him black out, lose consciousness. But a Japanese high court said he fell asleep behind the wheel, and if he was tired, they say, he should have pulled off the road. The U.S., the State Department, has said they're exploring all options for some kind of a resolution here. Andrea Mitchell joins us now. And Andrea, help us understand this better, right? In sort of 2 buckets here. Number one, what would a resolution look like? And number 2, what is the appetite, right, with the U.S. government having so much on their plate to get Alconis back, to negotiate with our Japanese allies to get him back anytime soon?
Well, I would say the appetite is very, very low because this is so complicated. There's a history of tensions between the U.S. military and Japan, as you well know, Okinawa and other cases. And this has got to be seen in that context, as well as it is different from the wrongfully detained people who were bringing, as Brittany Griner said, an ounce of cannabis oil in a vape, vape cartridge, and also, of course, Paul Whelan, who was completely inappropriately charged with spying and has been sentenced to years and years in prison. Brittany Griner also 9.5 years in prison. This is different. It's 3 years, which is very harsh. And in fact, there is a letter now from 20 very powerful Republican senators, Mitt Romney, Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, Susan Collins, 20 Republican senators saying, please, respectfully, humbly to the Japanese leader, please expel him, send him home, pointing out that 95% of Japanese people on the same charge get suspended sentences. So there's certainly a disproportionate sentence. You interviewed, Lieutenant's wife, and it's heartbreaking, but it's not in the same bucket as the hostages, and that's why this is not considered a wrongfully detained person, and the hostage negotiators are not working on it. And that's why, even though they are represented by the same group of people who are held in Iran, held all over the country, the world, and Russia, of course, Mark Fogel, they're not being treated the same way by the State Department. It's very awkward for the diplomats.
I'm so glad you're raising this point, Andrea, because just to pull back the curtain, we had these conversations with our team putting together the show. I've had it with our producers here, that these are sort of 2 different situations. Now, Trevor Reed was obviously at this demonstration today. He has spoken with me about how passionately he feels about the case of Ridge Alconis. It is 2 different things, right? They are 2 sort of separate instances. But you mentioned something important, too, which is the backdrop, this sort of sentiment of anti-U.S. military in Japan. And that plays into this, too. Lieutenant Alconis' wife, Brittany, was telling me that, Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, who is the U.S. ambassador to Japan, has been also talking with them. They've met with staff. I think Ambassador Emanuel met with both Lieutenant Alconis and his wife before he was in prison just recently.
And, Rahm Emanuel, if anyone knows how to pull levers in the U.S. government, it's the former White House Chief of Staff, former top member of Congress. So Rahm Emanuel knows how to get things done, the mayor of Chicago, a powerhouse himself in the Democratic Party. But dealing with Japan is such a sensitive thing. They're a key ally. We're in the middle of so much tension with China, North Korea, the Taiwan visit. I mean, it's just a terrible time for this to be happening and coming to a head. But, of course, for the lieutenant and his wife and his 3 children, it's awful. Well, we can't even imagine that. Yet the diplomats have to be very, very concerned and aware of the fact that 2 people died in this accident. Now, he fell asleep at the wheel, but, of course, the medical exam and the family say that he was not treated properly with a proper medical exam while he was held in, while he was incarcerated and detained. And they didn't check him, so they reject fully the accusation that he fell asleep because he was too tired, should have pulled over. They say this was an event, a syncopal event, some sort of a brain event, because he passed out, was weak when he tried to open the door, that this is something that could happen to anyone, and it was an accident, and it should not be 3 years in prison.
Andrea Mitchell, our chief foreign affairs correspondent, our chief Washington correspondent. Andrea, I really appreciate your sensitivity to the nuance and the reporting here. Thank you, as always. Coming up here on the show, TikTok cracking down on political ads, getting ready for the midterms, and all the potential misinformation that could end up on the app. Plus, why more and more black parents are homeschooling their kids. We've got that story after the break. Let's talk TikTok with this new push to fight misinformation ahead of the midterms coming up in just a couple of months. TikTok's going to ban influencers from getting paid for any kind of political content they put out there. Now, the app already does not allow formal political ads, right? But like, here's an example. Let's say you're a home chef doing a recipe video and you're like famous on TikTok for this. And a candidate wanted to give you $100 to wear your campaign shirt or their campaign shirt while you're cooking. That would be a no-no. Okay, can't do that. In a statement, TikTok saying that we take our responsibility to protect the integrity of our platform, particularly around elections, with the utmost seriousness. Now, you can still make unpaid video about politics, right? The new rules also don't prevent candidates like Ken Russell down in Florida, who we told you about a couple weeks ago. He can still post content and hope it ends up on your algorithm, on your FYP. Jake Ward has more.
TikTok is essentially battening down the hatches for the midterms with a sort of a longer lead time than they did when it came to the 2020 elections. In a blog post and in a briefing with reporters, they essentially said that they are going to try to get out in front of misinformation by creating an election center for the first time, a place that they can direct users to when they encounter a misinformation hashtag or seem to be discussing political events. Now, TikTok has long had a policy banning paid political advertising, but in this case they are also clarifying that this includes people being paid to produce content as influencers. As you know, there is a long history of political candidates and parties trying to partner up with influencers to get out the vote among young people, to shift perspective on opinions one way or another. This has been a long-standing playbook of the modern political landscape. Of course, there are many types of partnerships, and in conversations with reporters, a TikTok executive did admit that still having partnerships, right, an event partnership or a networking partnership, that will still be allowed. But actually exchanging money to get the word out there will no longer be allowed on TikTok. Now, that has been policy for a long time, but that they are cracking down on that in a new way. Meanwhile, this happens, of course, as everybody else is ramping up as well. In a blog post on Tuesday, Facebook's parent company Meta also said that they are basically going to stay the course. They're sticking with the same lessons that they learned from the 2020 elections in their handling of the midterms. So all of these platforms now are sort of looking toward this moment, this political moment, as a big and very complicated situation for them, and they seem to be rolling out the big guns as quickly as they can. Hallie?
Jake Ward, thank you for that. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, opening statements start today. They did in a federal case against R. Kelly, the disgraced singer. He's accused of having sex with minors, recording multiple alleged assaults, and rigging his 2008 state child pornography trial, where he was acquitted. His defense attorney told jurors the law doesn't let them decide if he's a bad guy, but whether he actually did these things, these alleged offenses. The trial comes nearly 2 months after Kelly was convicted on racketeering and sex trafficking charges. He's been sentenced to 30 years in prison and says he plans to appeal. Number 2, the D.C.-based nonprofit Freedom Initiative says a Saudi terror court has sentenced a women's rights activist to 34 years in prison over tweets she posted calling for basic human rights. She was reportedly detained while vacationing there last year. The Freedom Initiative says she's a mom of 2 and a PhD student at the University of Leeds in the UK. NBC News has reached out to the university, the Saudi embassy in London, the British Foreign Office, and to Twitter for comment. Number 3, the White House's COVID coordinator says that new variant-specific boosters, meaning like protect you against, say, BA.5, could come in the next few weeks. Dr. Ashish Jha says he's expecting to see CDC and FDA approval within the next month. What's not clear is whether there will be enough boosters for every adult come the fall. Number 4, a buzzy story out of Canada. Did you see this? Ontario's Premier Doug Ford. Oh, he swallowed a bee. It flew in his mouth and he swallowed it. This is a live news conference on healthcare. He drinks some water. Then he keeps going. Would I have kept going? If a bee flies into my mouth during a newscast, can I just tell you, I'm gone. I'm out. Just roll break. Number 5, the New York City Ballet says Solange Knowles is composing music for its fall fashion gala. It makes her the first black woman to compose a score for them. She's a Grammy Award winner, of course, and so she's very excited about the production. It'll debut next month. Just no bees in the studio. Do you know what I mean? To our ongoing series now on education, kids under pressure. More and more black parents saying they are done with the public school system after having to deal with years of complications from COVID inequities, from culture war fights over critical race theory, etc. So what are they doing? They're turning to homeschooling instead. Before COVID, only 3% of black students were homeschooled, but by the end of 2020, that number was up to 16%. Antonia Hilton met up with parents who made educational collectives, basically got together in groups, not just to hang out, but to support each other in these homeschooling efforts. Watch.
When you look at the state of schools right now, are black kids being served?
Our current system is not designed in a way to serve black children.
Antonia is joining us now. And Antonia, talk a little bit more about why parents made this decision for their kids, and then also how the pandemic played into this, because, the 2020 school year was kind of a crazy one for so many families around this country.
Absolutely. That might be an understatement, Hallie. But the reality is that the pandemic wasn't the first moment at which black families realized that public schools in many of their communities were failing. These are frustrations that go back years, sometimes decades, especially when you look at cities like Detroit, where I met some homeschooling families. And what I heard was a range of concerns. For some, it was these fights over race and history and the number of states looking at or passing legislation that would restrict the ways that teachers could talk about race, talk about history and identity in schools. At least 36 states passed or proposed that type of legislation. That meaning that millions of Americans were looking at this in their school districts and drawing, conclusions about what that might mean for their kids. And for black families, there's been concern forever about the way that textbooks talk, for example, about slavery or the civil rights movement, and they felt like it wasn't the full story. And so some parents that I met in New Jersey, actually you're seeing some of their kids on the screen right now, they told me they pulled out their kids because they were worried about their historical knowledge. And so for different families, it looked a little different, but it really was ultimately that they felt that the black experience wasn't going to be there for their kids in the schools, and they needed to do something better.
I love this idea of the group that you spoke with, one of them, the Melanin Village, about since 2020, they've helped something like nearly 500 families, this approach to teaching that they have. And we mentioned it a second ago, but the idea that it does take a village. It does take a village. And, parents who are homeschooling can get more support and can perhaps feel stronger in their efforts by joining together rather than doing it individually siloed.
Exactly. And, they also have created these collectives to make this accessible because homeschooling is not necessarily easy for everyone to do. Some people are single parents. They can't afford to just not be working. Some people, they want to be in their career. They want to be at the office from 9 to 5. So they need some creative options. And so that sort of group approach where multiple parents are involved in your child's education, they're sharing resources, they're handing down textbooks, they're doing testing prep together. It means that not only does your child have more support, but your child has friends. And it kind of busts that myth about homeschooling, right? That you're losing out on socialization, your kids are isolated. You can see right there, they're on a farm, and that's what school looks like for them from one day to the next.
Some of the hope here, right, is that they want these decisions to inspire schools to do better. Do they feel optimistic about that?
Not in most cases. Many of the parents hope that schools learn lessons from them, but they don't want to wait to find out. Take a listen to a conversation that I had with the founder of the Melanin Village.
If we're talking about the system overall, I think that gets into things that are a bit deeper. I don't want my child to be the guinea pig in the midst of us still figuring this out.
They want the onus right now to be on school districts to figure all of this out. But in the meantime, they want to do what's best for their kids in the months and years to come, Hallie.
Antonia Hilton, great reporting. Thank you, as always. Appreciate it. Good to see you. When we come back, the exclusive NBC News interview with General Frank McKenzie, who is in charge of all American troops in Afghanistan when the U.S. withdrew. What he's now telling our Courtney Kuby 1 year later, coming up. Tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. Nearly a year after the chaotic and deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan, the commander of all U.S. troops in the region at the time is sharing more about his reflections on that moment in an NBC News exclusive. General Frank McKenzie was charged with leading the withdrawal mission, telling us it was doomed from the start, he says. 13 Americans were killed in the botched plans to leave Bagram Air Base, and so many more people were hurt. Here's our Pentagon correspondent, Courtney Kuby.
It was about a year ago, the end of the U.S. presence in Afghanistan. On August 14, 2021, the U.S. began a non-combatant evacuation operation as Taliban fighters surrounded the capital, Kabul. The next 2 weeks proved chaotic and deadly.
I felt very strongly that we had the ability to keep a platform in Afghanistan at about 2,500.
Critics said any U.S. presence would put the U.S. back at war with the Taliban and require thousands more troops to deploy. But General Frank McKenzie, who commanded all the troops in the region at the time, says the withdrawal could have turned out differently.
I would have preferred to hold Bagram at 2,500, but that's what it would have taken, and that would also assume the Afghans would stand and fight with you. And we thought the Afghans would stand and fight with us at 2,500.
President Biden ordered all U.S. troops to leave, a decision the administration defends even today.
As for the argument about troops on the ground, I mean, we've heard from other defense leaders as well that had we kept that number or a large number of troops on the ground after May, and of course the president extended that to August, we would have found ourselves at war with the Taliban, and American troops would have come under attack again, which means that it would have been very likely that we would have had to add to the 2,500 troops that were already there. And that was just unacceptable to the president, that we weren't going to not only add troops, but that we were going to stay at war indefinitely with the Taliban.
McKenzie still believes it was doomed from the start.
I think we wanted to have it all. We wanted to withdraw and essentially go to zero and yet maintain a diplomatic platform in the country, and that was not feasible. And so that's why we got ourselves into an extremist situation at the very end.
1 year ago today, McKenzie was at Kabul airport, the front line of the evacuation.
It was a surreal scene. You had human waste all over the deck, partially eaten food, water bottles. The possibility of attack was very, very real.
But he believes the chaos was inevitable once the U.S. announced the decision to withdraw.
I believe that what happened in August of last year occurred when we decided to leave completely in April of that year. And once you make that basic decision, then events took on a certain trajectory. That's not a military decision, that's a political decision.
McKenzie believes the military alone shouldn't take the blame.
I think the U.S. failure in Afghanistan was not the failure solely of the U.S. military, although we certainly bear responsibility for that, but a whole of government approach that simply failed.
The events of last summer still haunt Frank McKenzie.
I've thought about it every day. It's something that I spent a lot of time considering. The lost opportunities, what it meant, the loss of human beings.
What were some of the lost opportunities that you still think about now?
I think about what we could have done differently, and I owe that to those who did not come home. Not only those who did not come home from what happened in August, but those that preceded them in our 20-year engagement in Afghanistan, because those lives are very valuable too.
Courtney is joining us now. Courtney, I'm so glad to have you, and I'm so glad that you shared that conversation with us, because I think it's an important one. One of the questions at the time of the withdrawal had been about the intelligence capabilities, and you heard a lot from this administration, and as you know from the Pentagon, about the idea that they still had so-called over-the-horizon capabilities, that it was going to be okay because they still had, teams in the region, they were able to react quickly. 1 year later, how is that assessment holding up?
So if you ask the administration right now, they say, look, we just took out the head of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan.
Right,
that proves, exactly, that proves that we still have this capability. But I actually posed that question to General McKenzie, now retired General McKenzie, yesterday, asking about that. And he said when he left the job, the U.S. intelligence collection picture had degraded down to about 2% of what it was before the U.S. withdrawal from there. Now, that makes sense that there would be a degradation because there's no U.S. military, there's no U.S. diplomats there. But the fact that they lost, in his assessment, 97 or 98% of that intelligence collection, it's a fact that he says, Hallie, really concerns him even today.
Courtney Kuby, great reporting as always. Thank you. Coming up, NASA taking its first step towards its next mission to the moon. What we know about Artemis and, the other places it could go. Plus, one grandma's going viral for her thrift shop performance. You ready for this clip? Keep it locked for the local folks. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, libraries in a school district near Fort Worth, Texas, are going to look a little different this year. Officials there have told the public schools in the city of Keller to temporarily take out all the books that had been reported for having so-called concerning material in the last year. You know what some of these books are? The Bible, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, a graphic novel version of The Diary of Anne Frank. The district says it has a new policy that's requiring every book that's challenged to be reconsidered, so it is possible some of these books could end up back on shelves. From our West Coast Bureau, rapper A$AP Rocky pleaded not guilty to 2 felony charges in an LA court today. He was charged with assault earlier this week, accused of firing a handgun toward a former friend in Hollywood last November. The rapper's attorney did not immediately comment after the charges were announced. He's due back in court this November. Plus,
over the sea on the old rugged tree.
From our Midwest Bureau, this grandma from Ohio was caught on camera performing in a local Goodwill, singing her heart out on a karaoke machine she found in the store. She asked an employee for help to get it, and he put in a song request. She has gone viral. Thousands of people have watched her. Go, Granny, go. You know, love it. Love to see it. Love the vibes. To the talk of the space world today. NASA put the most powerful rocket it ever built on a launch pad in Florida as it gets ready for a historic liftoff. You got so many people so excited about this launch. Why? Because the rocket Artemis could one day carry humans back to the moon. But before that happens, they got to test the thing. So they're doing a test flight without a crew around the moon. That is set for later this month. Let's bring in our Tom Costello. This is this launch isn't for another couple of weeks. It's expected to draw a ton of visitors to the Space Coast. But already, I feel like the hype around this is a lot, Tom.
Well, listen, the headline is that NASA's going back to the moon. I mean, that's a big deal. By the way, yeah. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo, right? The Greek god. That's where we get the name from. And this is all about the next chapter after Apollo. So going back to the moon. Why are we going to the moon? Number one, because it's there. Number two, because they want to build a moon base from which they can go on to Mars. But the bottom line is, you're right, this mission isn't for about 10 days or so. It's on August 29th. It is an uncrewed, we don't say unmanned anymore, uncrewed mission that will spend 42 days in orbit around the moon. And then it will come back and it will splash down off the coast of San Diego, just like those old Apollo spacecraft did. If it all goes well, and you know NASA, they want to check every single I and every single T, make sure everything's perfect. If it goes well, they'll put a human, multiple humans, on board a spacecraft to do the same thing, orbit the moon. And then if that goes well, they're going to land on the moon with a woman and a first person of color ever on one of these lunar missions. So this is a very big deal, and the excitement is just really palpable right now.
That's what I'm saying. People are super excited. I know you're going, right, for the launch, Tom? Like, we're sending you to go when the launch actually happens, yeah?
Yeah, I'm going to the launch, okay, not the moon yet. Anyway,
that's what
I mean, my wife would argue. Right, exactly.
Sure.
You know, she's ready to send me to the moon anyway. But you know, the point being,
so listen, one of the things you talked about, it is. You talked about how they want certain people they want to have a woman, a person of color, to land on the moon. But it goes beyond that. They want to use the moon for other stuff. They want to do research. They want to look for resources. They want to use the moon maybe as a launch pad to get to Mars. Like there are grand plans for the lunar landing.
Importantly, they're going to be landing on the moon's south pole. Why? Because there is water ice there. They can use that water ice to fuel their missions onto Mars, to drink water, to build a moon colony. And we also need to make a point that this is an international effort, right? The Europeans are going to have an astronaut that will land on the moon as a part of this, the Canadians, the Japanese. So that's one way NASA is affording this. You know, it costs a boatload of money. And so now, instead of, the Apollo days, it was all us paying for it. Now we've got very much an international consortium, absent the Russians, absent the Chinese, who are a part of this. And oh, by the way, I mentioned the Chinese. We're in a new space race because the Chinese also want to put people on the moon in 2030. So the race is on, the heat is on, and the United States wants to do it 25, 26, something like that.
Tom Costello, thank you so much. Love to see it. Can't wait till you get there.
Okay.
Appreciate it. The launch, not the moon. Still to come. The fashion trend cycle has been on hyper speed since the start of the pandemic. And the latest one is going viral for some interesting reasons. We'll talk about what Barbie core is all about coming up. So I'm sure you already know about fashion trends, that they tend to go in and out of style. Think normcore, cottagecore, coastal grandmother, right? But how about Barbiecore? Like going hardcore on dressing like Barbie. You may have seen it. It's kind of going viral. Celebrities, regular people, your friends maybe dressing up in all pink, hot pink, right? Not any pink, but like bright neon pink, trying to replicate Barbie's look. Trend experts and stylists say it's all about embracing some of the femininity aspects of Barbie. And all this hype has been driven by those pictures of Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling filming the new Barbie movie. Look at all that neon. According to Etsy, searches for pink clothes are up 20% in the last 3 months compared to last year. And pink stuff for your house up nearly 40%. The whole thing's blowing up on where else? TikTok. Look at this. Hashtag Barbiecore has almost 25 million views. Covering all things Barbiecore for us is Maya Eaglin, who has other journalistic pursuits beyond Barbiecore. Yes. I realize that. It was sort of interesting for a couple of reasons. So first, let's talk about what the trend is and sort of the broader significance here, because there is one. This has been everywhere. Fashion shows, the Grammys, the Met Gala. Like, who's fueling the hype? Because somebody has to be, right?
I think it is everywhere for several reasons. On social specifically, I've seen Gen Z, even people in my own circles, feeding into this trend. And it's about being bold. It's about taking bright colors, really feeding that inner child that you might have and being confident about taking that piece that maybe got dust in the back of your closet during the pandemic and putting it on and rocking it.
What's interesting about the concept of a Barbiecore thing or theme coming back is that when you look at the evolution of Barbie, the brand has not always been representative. Mattel, the Washington Post first did this piece on Barbiecore that got a lot of attention, and they had a Mattel rep, I believe, who said, who made the point that, like, yes, Barbie actually, they've worked to make her more inclusive and have a variety of professions and body shapes, etc. But for a long time, the criticism on Barbie was that she just didn't set realistic standards for girls and for women. I wonder how much of this trend is like a little bit of trying to take power back or inverting some of this, right? Some of that criticism on its head.
Absolutely. I think you are 100% correct. This trend is not binary. It is inclusive. It is open to anyone. It's an invitation saying, hey, if this piece of clothing makes you feel confident, makes you feel good about yourself, then put it on. And for a lot of Gen Zs, I think we grew up in the early 2000s, late 90s. We had fashion icons like Destiny's Child, Barbie, of course, Destiny's Child already said, Cheetah Girls even, and so now we're able to curate our own closets, and I think it's reliving that fantasy just a little bit.
You said that people in your, can you just bring us inside your group chats and your FYP, your friends are doing this, you said? Some people in your friend group? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's all about not only following the trends, but what is going to get that engagement online. And right now, color is in. It's about being unique. It's about stepping out. It's about embracing what makes you you. And sometimes what you put on can really tell the world a lot about how you're feeling about not only yourself, but how you're feeling about other people. And I think this is just a fun moment. It's a way for people to express joy.
So you're saying it's a Barbie world, Maya? Okay.
It's a Barbie world, and we can live in it, Hallie.
I love it, Maya. Thank you so much, Maya Eaglin. I appreciate it. Listen, we always said this show, we give you a little taste of everything, folks. Now you know what the Youngs are up to. That's it for this hour. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll have a whole lot more for you here. Same time, same place. We appreciate you being with us tonight. As always, every night. More coverage picks up right now.